Imagine waking up one calm morning to find your backyard ripped apart, your fence lying flat on the ground, and your neighbor standing there with a smirk, declaring, "I need access, so I cut it down." That was my reality. I stood frozen, staring at the destruction while she brushed it off as if tearing down. Someone's private property was the most natural thing in the world. Her name, Karen. And if there's one thing Karen believed, it was that the world revolved around her needs. She had been complaining for weeks that walking around the block to get to the street was too much trouble. Her house sat behind mine, and she decided my yard would make a convenient shortcut. When I refused, she threatened to handle it herself. I thought it was just talk. I was wrong. The nerve of it left me speechless. She had no shame, no guilt, just entitlement, radiating off her like sunlight. She even dared to tell me, "You'll get used to it. This is better for both of us, better for me." She had destroyed something I paid for and maintained, and then acted like I was the unreasonable one. I could have called the police. I could have yelled, argued, or demanded she fix it. But instead, I decided on something far more powerful. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come in shouting matches or fists. It comes quietly, wrapped in patience, waiting for the perfect opportunity. And that opportunity came in the most unexpected way. A property auction. She had no idea that the very land she abused, the boundary she disrespected, would soon slip right out of her hands and into mine. The morning started just like any other, quiet, calm, and filled with that soft warmth that comes when the sun first rises above the rooftops. I had just brewed a cup of coffee and stepped outside to enjoy the peaceful view of my backyard. Birds chirped from the maple tree near the fence, and the grass shimmered faintly with dew. It was one of those mornings that almost convinces you the world is gentle, but peace doesn't last long when you live next to someone like Karen. I heard the sound before I saw it, the sharp crack of wood splintering. At first I thought maybe a branch had fallen. Then came the unmistakable whir of a power saw. My heart sank as I set my coffee on the patio table and hurried toward the noise. And there, standing boldly in my yard with a pair of heavy cutters in her hands, was Karen. She was mid-swing, hacking into the last post of my wooden fence. Panels already lay scattered on the grass like broken bones. Her face was flushed, but she didn't look guilty or panicked. She looked determined, almost smug, like she was finishing a project she had been planning for a while. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, my voice louder than I intended. Karen glanced at me as if I'd just interrupted her gardening. She wiped her brow dramatically and said, "Oh good, you're here. I'm making this easier for both of us. Now I can walk straight through instead of going all the way around the block." I stood frozen for a second, trying to process what I was hearing. "That's my fence," I finally managed to say, pointing at the pile of ruined wood. "On my property." She gave a careless shrug, her lips curling into a smirk. "It was in the way. You'll thank me later. This is going to save us both time." Her words struck me harder than the sight of the destruction. The entitlement in her tone was breathtaking, as if she had performed some community service by destroying something I had paid for, built, and cared for. My pulse quickened. I wanted to yell, to rage, but the sheer audacity left me stunned. "Karen, you can't just— "Oh, please," she interrupted, raising a hand like a queen dismissing a servant. "Don't make a fuss. It's just a fence. You'll get used to it. This way is better." The morning sunlight fell across her face, highlighting the smug satisfaction in her eyes. Behind her, the gap where my fence once stood opened a direct path from her backyard to mine. It wasn't a shortcut, it was an invasion. I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You destroyed my property. That's not your decision to make." Karen rolled her eyes, clearly bored with the conversation. "You're being dramatic. No one cares about a few boards. You should be grateful I'm not charging you for making things more convenient." The words were so absurd I almost laughed, but anger was bubbling too hot beneath my skin. I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself in the stillness of the day, the children laughing down the street, the sound of a lawnmower in the distance, the smell of fresh-cut grass drifting on the breeze. The world kept moving, but right here, in this moment, Karen had turned my calm morning into chaos. I thought about calling the police. I thought about grabbing my phone and recording everything. But I knew Karen, she thrived on drama. She would twist the story, play the victim, maybe even escalate things until it became unbearable. No, shouting or threatening her wouldn't fix this. She had already shown me exactly who she was, someone who believed rules didn't apply to her. So instead, I stared at the pile of broken boards and swallowed my anger. "Fine," I said quietly. Karen tilted her head, confused by my calmness. "Fine, yes," I said, locking eyes with her. "But don't say I didn't warn you." She laughed, a high-pitched mocking sound. "Oh, come on, don't be so serious. You'll sit better this way." With that, she stepped through the opening and strutted across my yard like it was her personal hallway, her shopping bag bouncing against her hip. She didn't even glance back as she vanished into the street beyond. I stood there for a long time, staring at the wreckage of my fence. Sunlight glinted off the nails sticking out of the broken posts, The birds had gone quiet. The space that once felt private, safe, and mine now felt violated, wide open for anyone to walk through. As I picked up a piece of splintered wood, I felt the sting of frustration burn in my chest. But beneath that, something else stirred, something sharper, colder, more patient. Karen thought she had one. She thought she could bulldoze her way through life, leaving others to clean up the mess, but she had underestimated me. That morning I made a decision. I wouldn't scream or argue. I wouldn't fight her on her terms. Instead, I would wait. I would watch, because sooner or later, someone like Karen always went too far. And when that moment came, I'd be ready not with fists or threats, but with something stronger. I looked at the empty gap where my fence once stood and whispered to myself, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The sun climbed higher, bathing the yard in warm light. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary day, nothing more than a quiet suburban morning. But for me, it was the day the war began, a war not of violence, but of patience, cunning, and the sweetest revenge waiting just beyond the horizon. And as Karen strutted down the sidewalk, oblivious to the storm she had unleashed, I smiled faintly to myself. Let her think she had one. For now, because in truth, the game had only just begun. The days after my fence came down felt strange. My backyard, once private and peaceful, had become a thoroughfare. Every morning, as I stepped outside with my coffee, I found myself half expecting Karen to come striding through like she owned the place. And more often than not, she did. The first time I saw her after the fence incident, she didn't even pause at the edge of her yard. She simply marched through the open space, sunglasses perched on her nose, a grocery bag swinging from her arm. The sun was high, spilling light over the street, making every detail sharp and clear. My grass glistened, the flowers I had planted by the patio bloomed brightly. And there she was, cutting right across like I was invisible. I stepped off the patio and blocked her path. "Karen," I said, my voice firm. She stopped, looked me over with that familiar smirk, and adjusted her sunglasses. "What now? Don't tell me you're still upset about the fence. You're trespassing," I said. "This is my yard. You can't keep walking through here." Karen let out a laugh, loud enough for the neighbors across the street to hear. A couple of kids riding their bikes stopped to glance over, curious about the commotion. "Trespassing," she repeated with mock outrage. "Oh, please, don't make it sound like I'm breaking into Fort Knox. I'm just walking. It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," I snapped, heat rising in my chest. "You destroyed my fence. You walk through my property like it belongs to you. That's not how this works." She folded her arms, tapping one finger against her elbow as if she were humoring me. "You're being dramatic again. Honestly, I don't know why you're so obsessed with keeping me out. What's the harm? I'm saving myself 10 minutes. You don't even use this part of your yard." I stared at her, stunned by how casually she justified stealing something that wasn't hers. It wasn't just a shortcut, it was the principle. She didn't see boundaries. She didn't see respect. She only saw her convenience. "Karen, if you want a shortcut, you should talk to the city about an easement. Or better yet, just walk the block like everyone else." Her lips curved into that infuriating smile again. Why would I waste time when I already solved the problem? She waved at the gap in the fence like she was showing off a new home project. "See? Easy, you should thank me." "Really?" Neighbors had started peeking out from their porches, drawn by the sound of our voices. I caught sight of Mrs. Daniels from next door, standing on her steps with her watering can, shaking her head slowly. She knew Karen's reputation. Everyone did. I lowered my voice, but the steel in it was unmistakable. "This is your only warning. Stay off my property." Karen leaned in slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Or what?" she whispered just loud enough for me to hear. That was the moment I realized arguing with her was useless. Logic didn't work. Boundaries didn't work. She believed she was untouchable. So instead of answering, I stepped aside and let her walk through. The smug victory on her face told me she thought she had won, but inside, I was already planning. Over the next week, Karen's confidence grew. She used my yard daily, strutting through in broad daylight without even pretending to ask. Sometimes she carried groceries. Sometimes she was on her phone, chattering loudly as if the yard was her private sidewalk. Once, unbelievably, she brought a friend with her. I watched them laugh together as they crossed the grass, pointing at my patio furniture as if I were the guest and they were the hosts. The brazenness of it was almost comical. Neighbors whispered, shaking their heads, but no one dared confront her directly. Karen had that effect on people. Her entitlement was so overwhelming that it silenced others. One Saturday morning, as the sun spilled golden light across the neighborhood, I caught her red-handed again. This time she wasn't just passing through, she had paused in the middle of my yard. Standing on the patch of grass I had just seeded, she was scrolling on her phone, tapping the screen with her long nails. Completely unconcerned, I stepped outside, my jaw tight. "Karen." She glanced up lazily, then back at her phone. "Relax, I'm almost done with my text." "You're standing on my grass." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, it's grass, it grows back." Something about the casual cruelty in her tone snapped the last thread of my patience. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten. I just stood there and stared at her until she finally shifted uncomfortably under my silence.
"What?"
she asked, clearly irritated. "Nothing," I said softly. "Keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure it'll work out great for you." Her brows furrowed at the cryptic response, but she quickly shrugged it off and continued walking toward the street. She didn't know it yet, but every step she took was one step closer to her own downfall. Later that day, as I raked the broken remains of my fence into a pile, a neighbor wandered over. It was Mr. Riley, a quiet man who had lived down the block for years. He watched me for a moment before speaking. "She's really crossing the line this time," he muttered. "Tell me about it," I said. Straightening up, he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I heard something you might want to know. A part of her property, the strip right along the back, is tied up in unpaid taxes. Word is, it's going to auction soon." I froze, gripping the rake handle tighter. "Auction," he nodded. "It happens all the time when people don't pay up. It's public record. You should check into it." The air seemed to shift around me in that moment. Sunlight flickered through the leaves of the maple tree, scattering patterns across the grass. My anger, my frustration, the endless irritation of dealing with Karen, all of it twisted into something new. Opportunity. I thanked him and watched him walk away, my mind already racing. If what he said was true, then Karen's arrogance had left her vulnerable. She thought she owned the world. But maybe, just maybe, the ground beneath her feet was slipping away that night. As the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange, I sat on my patio with a notebook, scribbling down possibilities. Karen believed she was untouchable. She believed she could do whatever she wanted without consequence. But what she didn't know was that sometimes the universe delivers justice in the most unexpected forms. And if fate was giving me a chance to strike back, I wasn't going to waste it. The war had begun, and I was ready to play the long game. The morning of the auction broke clear and bright. The kind of day that seemed ordinary to everyone else but carried a heavy weight for me. The sun rose steadily, casting a golden sheen over rooftops and lawns, and the hum of sprinklers filled the neighborhood with the rhythm of routine. But I was anything but calm. My heart had been beating fast since dawn, the anticipation pulsing through me like electricity. I had spent the last week buried in research. The rumor from Mr. Riley had proved true. Part of Karen's property specifically, the narrow strip of land that bordered mine, was up for auction due to unpaid taxes. She had either ignored the notices or believed herself too important to be affected by them. That arrogance was her weakness, and I intended to use it. When I first read the official notice, I couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't just land. It was leverage. That strip was exactly the piece Karen had relied on to strut through my yard as if she owned the place. If I won, it would no longer belong to her. It would belong to me. By the time I arrived at the county courthouse, the sun was already high, the steps warm under my shoes. A small crowd had gathered, investors in suits, a few locals hoping for deals, and curious onlookers with nothing better to do. The air buzzed with chatter, people comparing notes and speculating on prices. I found a spot near the edge, my palms slightly sweaty, and watched as the auctioneer, a stout man with a booming voice, prepared his list. One by one, properties were announced, bids called, hands shot up. Some parcels went for thousands, others for just a few hundred. I kept waiting, nerves twisting tighter with every passing minute. Finally, the auctioneer's voice rang out. "Next, we have parcel 1 for B, a narrow strip of residential property along the east boundary of Maplewood Lane. Starting bid, $500. My breath caught. This was it. At first the crowd was silent. Investors weren't interested in a narrow strip of land with no development potential. It wasn't good for building, farming, or flipping. To anyone else, it was useless. But to me, it was everything. I raised my hand. 500, the auctioneer pointed. 500. Do I hear 6? Silence. A few people glanced at their papers, then shook their heads. 6. The auctioneer called again. Still nothing. For a moment, I thought it was mine already. But then, out of nowhere, a hand shot up across the crowd. A man in a gray jacket, his expression unreadable. 600. My stomach tightened. Who was this guy? Was he just fishing for a deal, or did he know something? I raised my hand again. 700. Do I hear 8? 8. The man called calmly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People began to take notice. Sensing tension, I forced myself to stay steady. 900. Do I hear 1,000? The auctioneer pressed. The man hesitated, then shook his head. Relief flooded me. 1,000. The auctioneer repeated, scanning the crowd. No one moved. Going once, going twice. Sold for $900. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and just like that, the land was mine. I stood still for a moment, almost disbelieving it. Around me, people shuffled papers, moved on to the next lot, but I felt frozen in place. $900 had just shifted the balance of power in my neighborhood. After the paperwork was signed, I stepped back into the sunlight, holding the deed in my hand. The courthouse steps were buzzing with life, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. It was official. Karen's shortcut no longer belonged to her. It belonged to me. On the drive home, I imagined her face when she found out. For weeks, she had treated me like an obstacle, something to be brushed aside. She thought she was invincible, untouchable, but reality was about to slam into her harder than a wrecking ball when I pulled into my driveway. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the yard, and as if on cue, there she was, Karen, marching through the gap in the fence with a shopping bag in hand. She didn't even glance in my direction, humming loudly as she crossed my grass. I let her pass, saying nothing. Timing was everything. The next morning I got up early. The dew still clung to the grass, sparkling in the light. I called a surveyor, who arrived with bright orange stakes and a clipboard. Together, we walked the property line, marking the strip that now belonged to me. The stakes drove into the ground with firm thuds, each one like a drumbeat of justice. By mid-morning, the line was clear. The very path Karen used every day now lay firmly under my ownership as I hammered the last stake. I heard the familiar sound of her voice. "What's all this?" I turned. Karen was standing a few feet away, her expression curious but tinged with suspicion. "Surveying my property," I said evenly. She laughed. "Your property? That's my line. I've lived here for years. Don't be ridiculous." Without a word, I pulled the folded deed from my pocket and handed it to her. She unfolded it, her eyes darting across the page. For the first time since I had known her, her face fell. The smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. This can't be right," she stammered. "It's right," I said. "I bought it yesterday legally. It's mine now." She shook her head, scanning the paper again as if the words might change. You can't just buy someone's property like that." "You can," I said softly, "when they don't pay their taxes." Her cheeks flushed red, the arrogance cracking under the weight of reality. She shoved the paper back into my hands and hissed, "This isn't over." But we both knew it was, as she stormed back across the yard, her shoulders stiff. I couldn't help but feel the rush of victory. The sun shone bright overhead. The stakes lined up neatly along the boundary, and for the first time in weeks, my yard felt like mine again. Karen had underestimated me. She thought I was weak, someone she could push around. But now, the ground itself had shifted beneath her feet, and this was only the beginning. The days after the auction were some of the most satisfying I had ever known. Each morning, as the sunlight spilled across my yard, I walked the boundary with quiet pride, my eyes tracing the fresh orange survey stakes that marked the land now officially mine. For the first time since Karen had cut down my fence, I felt like I had regained control. But if there was one thing I knew about Karen, it was this: she never backed down quietly. The first incident came 2 days later. I was raking leaves under the bright afternoon sun when I heard the familiar crunch of footsteps. Karen appeared, striding toward the gap in the fence as if nothing had changed. She wore oversized sunglasses and clutched her phone in one hand. But when she reached the first survey stake, she stopped short, her lips tightening. "What is this nonsense?" she demanded, pointing at the stakes. "You already know," I said, leaning casually on the rake. She scoffed. "Please, you think a few sticks in the ground make this yours? That strip has always been part of my yard." I pulled the folded deed from my back pocket. It practically become my shield. "Not anymore. It's mine now." Her jaw clenched. She waved her phone in my face. "I've already called the county. This is a mistake. They'll fix it." I smiled faintly. "They won't. It's legal. You had your chance to pay your taxes. You didn't." For a moment, she was silent, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form an argument but couldn't find one. Finally, she hissed, "You think you're clever, don't you? Buying a scrap of land just to spite me." I shrugged. "Call it what you want. But the fact is, you don't get to walk through here anymore." Her face flushed red. And for the first time, I saw something behind her anger: humiliation. Karen thrived on control, on bending people to her will. Now, in broad daylight, in plain view of curious neighbors peeking from porches, she was the one who had been outmaneuvered. She spun on her heel and stormed back across her yard, muttering curses under her breath. But Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. The very next morning, as sunlight filtered through the trees, I stepped outside to find one of the survey stakes knocked clean over. The orange ribbon fluttered on the ground like a fallen flag. My stomach tightened. It wasn't wind or accident, it was sabotage. I picked it up and hammered it back in, my jaw set. I didn't need to guess who had done it. Later that day, I caught her in the act. She was crouched low near another stake, yanking it out of the ground with a look of satisfaction. "What do you think you're doing?" I barked, striding toward her. She straightened, holding the stake in her hand like a trophy. "This is my yard," she snapped. "You can't just litter it with these ugly things." I pulled out my phone, raising it deliberately. "Smile, Karen. You're on camera now." Her eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," I said evenly. "And I'll be taking this to the police if you touch another one." For a moment, the only sound was the chirping of birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Finally, she dropped the stake and stomped away, muttering something about lawyers. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in streaks of orange and pink, I sat on my patio, thinking about my next move. Karen was cornered, and cornered people lash out. I had won the land, yes, but the real battle was maintaining control. The following weekend, I decided to rebuild my fence. Bright Saturday sunlight gleamed off the new wood as I measured, hammered, and aligned each board with care. Neighbors passed by and offered nods of approval, some even stopping to chat. Word of the auction had spread, and more than one person congratulated me quietly, their voices tinged with amusement. Everyone had suffered from Karen's antics in one way or another, and my victory felt like a victory for all of us. Karen, of course, couldn't stand it. She appeared halfway through the morning, storming across her lawn, her hair wild, her face tight with fury. "You can't build that here," she shouted. "You're blocking my access." I wiped the sweat from my brow and leaned against the new section of fence. "Exactly the point," I said. "This is harassment," she cried, her voice shrill. "You're targeting me." I looked her square in the eye. "No, Karen, this is me protecting what's mine. Something you should have done for yourself." Her hands trembled at her sides, fists clenched, but she couldn't refute the truth. She had lost. The law, the paperwork, the very ground she walked on, it was no longer hers. For days afterward, she tried different tactics. She called the county office, but they told her the transfer was valid. She tried to rally neighbors, but most of them were too tired of her antics to care. She even stood on her porch one morning, shouting insults across the fence line, but I didn't take the bait. I simply sat on my patio, sipping my coffee, letting her rage echo into emptiness. Eventually, her outbursts quieted. The daylight that had once been filled with her arrogant struts across my yard was now peaceful again. Children laughed on their bikes, sprinklers ticked across lawns, and I enjoyed my coffee without interruption. The fence stood tall, strong, and unbroken, gleaming like a monument to patience and persistence. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her rarely change. She might have lost the land, but she hadn't lost her pride, and pride is a dangerous thing. Still, as I sat in the warm sunlight one evening, the fence casting long shadows across the grass, I couldn't help but smile. Whatever Karen tried next, I had already proved one thing. I wasn't someone she could bulldoze. I had played her game and won. For the first time in weeks, my yard felt truly mine again. And in that victory, under the bright glow of the afternoon sun, I felt something stronger than satisfaction. I felt peace, at least, for now. For a few weeks after I rebuilt the fence, life in the neighborhood settled into a kind of uneasy peace. The sun rose each morning, pouring golden light across my yard, and I savored the quiet moments with my coffee in hand. Children's laughter drifted from the sidewalks, sprinklers arced across freshly cut lawns, and for once, Karen's shadow no longer cut through my grass like an unwelcome reminder. But I knew it couldn't last. Karen was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. Her pride was like a fire that refused to go out, no matter how much water you poured on it. And sure enough, one bright Saturday morning, she lit the match again. I was trimming the hedge along the new fence when I heard shouting. Karen stood on her porch, her arms flailing, her voice carrying clear across the street. "This fence is illegal. This man stole my property. He thinks he can bully me, but he's wrong." Her words drew the attention of half the block. Curtains twitched, neighbors stepped out onto porches, and a couple of kids dropped their basketball to watch. Karen fed on the attention like a performer on stage. She pointed at me dramatically. "He bought that strip just to torment me, and I won't stand for it." I laid down my hedge trimmer and calmly walked to the edge of my yard. The sun was high and hot, but the air around me felt cool, steady. I had been waiting for this. "Karen," I called back, my voice even, "you lost that land fair and square. I didn't steal anything. I bought it legally." "Lies," she shrieked, waving a folder of papers. "I have proof that this belongs to me." She stomped down her porch steps, the folder clutched in her hands. As she crossed the sidewalk, she tripped, sending the folder flying. Pages scattered across the grass, fluttering like lost feathers. The crowd of neighbors gasped, but when I bent down to pick one up, I almost laughed. They weren't legal documents at all, they were old utility bills. Most of them past due. The sight said more than any argument ever could. Karen's proof was nothing but a pile of unpaid obligations. I held one up. "This is your proof." A late gas bill. Snickers rippled through the crowd. Karen's face turned crimson. She snatched the papers from the ground, stuffing them back into the folder with shaking hands. "That doesn't matter. None of this matters. This is harassment and I'll sue you." "Then sue," I said calmly. "But you won't win. You ignored your taxes, and the county sold the land. I bought it. That's the truth, Karen. Everyone here knows it." The neighbors murmured their agreement. Some crossed their arms, nodding. Others simply looked away, tired of the spectacle. For years, Karen had been the neighborhood's nightmare, shouting, complaining, demanding, and now, finally, the tide had turned. Karen must have felt it too, because her voice faltered. For the first time, her confidence cracked, her words stumbling as she searched for anything that could put her back on top. But there was nothing left. Her shortcut was gone, her fence-wrecking stunt exposed, her false proof scattered for all to see. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant sound of a lawnmower. Then Mrs. Daniels, the quiet woman from next door, spoke up. "You brought this on yourself, Karen. No one made you cut down his fence. No one made you ignore your taxes. You did this, and now you're paying for it." The words hit Karen harder than anything I could have said. She spun on her heel, stormed back to her house, and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. The crowd slowly dispersed, but not before several neighbors approached me with quiet smiles and pats on the back. "Good for you," one said. "About time someone stood up to her." Another added, "You handled that perfectly." I nodded, grateful, but inside I felt more than pride. I felt relief. For months, Karen had turned my life upside down with her arrogance. But now, under the bright daylight and in full view of everyone, she had finally defeated herself. The following week, the change was undeniable. Karen no longer crossed my yard. She no longer shouted from her porch or staged public outbursts. She kept to herself. Her once loud presence reduced to silence. Her pride had taken a blow it couldn't recover from, and the neighborhood seemed lighter for it one afternoon. I stood in my yard, admiring the rebuilt fence as the sun glowed warmly on its fresh wood. The grass was green, the flowers along the patio bloomed brightly, and the air carried the faint scent of barbecue from down the street. It was peaceful again, peaceful in a way it hadn't been since Karen first swung her cutters into my fence. I thought back to that morning, to her smirk, her arrogance, her certainty that she could bulldoze her way through life. She had thought cutting down my fence would give her power, but in the end it had given me mine. Justice hadn't come in shouting matches or fists. It had come in patience, paperwork, and the quiet satisfaction of watching arrogance collapse under its own weight. As I leaned against the fence, the sunlight warm on my shoulders, I realized the lesson was simple. Boundaries matter. Whether it's a fence, a strip of land, or the respect between neighbors, boundaries are what keep peace. Karen had learned that the hard way, and I, at last, had my yard and my peace back.